I got the spray bottle. It is a little travel bottle from Target. It wasn't actually a perfume bottle. My memory was wrong. I think they're like $1 or something like that. You don't have to use this. You can find any kind of spray bottle, but I just found that this tends to get sort of a finer mist of spray, so you get a little bit more even coverage than like a house, spray bottle like I showed earlier, like this bad boy right here, which this was just like $1 from Walmart. So kind of pick your poison as far as that goes. So I went ahead and sprayed the stencil, threw the stencil onto another just folding piece of manila folder. And again, you can use cardstock for this, or cardboard, or chipboard, or mylar, or acetate, or sort of plastic sheets and stuff like that. Sort of up to you, but you want it to be something that's like thin enough that you're not fighting the thickness of the material, but also strong enough that it doesn't just shrivel. So if you use like regular printer paper, it's just not beefy enough. It's just not going to hold up. But I took this, I did this to a couple other pieces, and I essentially cut, the top off of this one so I can do a color for the sky, and then the bottom off of this one so I can do a color for the sort of background ground. I'll go ahead and do this. So for this, you're going to want to use some paper, like watercolor paper, wet media paper, printmaking paper, pretty much anything that you have available that you can get that will hold up to liquids. So I'm going to try a couple different ways of working with the stencil. Feel free to try any of these, use any of these in yours, or not. If you like the spray like I already showed, then stick with that. So I just kind of want to make sure that this guy, the way I cut him, I want him to go off the edge, the bottom corner there. So I'm just going to hold him down. And I probably could, I'm just going to mark with a pencil where the top corners of my paper are. And I think I can tape this down, so that way I just flip it up and flip it back down. Let's go sideways. All right. So I'm going to try the sponge technique. I just have one of these cheap scrub sponges from Food Max, and then I mixed a little bit of acrylic paint, and gouache would work, or watercolor, with some water in an old cup. I'm just going to get a little bit of that sort of paint. So again, these are not going to be consistent like a print you would make in class with a press. There's going to be differences between each one, and that's going to be kind of fun and exciting. So I'm just going to take this, and you can see where there's some pure pigment on the sponge as opposed to where it's watered down. So I might get streaks and sort of cool stuff like that. So I'm just going to kind of hold that down. And this actually was a technique we used. I worked with, did some interior design remodeling jobs after college, and we would cut stencils and use sponges and latex paint through those stencils. So there we go. I got my background. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is I found some old tracing, these circle sheets they used to give us. I think we had them in geometry when I was in high school. It's just, piece of plastic with some circles cut in it. That's a stencil. I could use that if I want. Here's one that I think I got from the paint section at a hardware store that I've already used as a stencil, and that's why it's all kind of dirty. But you guys can see through that. It's a flower pattern, and I could, if you guys want, you can find and use other stencils. I want you to have at least, 2 to 3 layers that are your own hand-cut stencils. But if you want to find pre-made stencils and use them, you can get animal shapes and letter shapes and number shapes from educational supply stores. in hobby stores and stuff like that. If you want to include those in your print, then feel free. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and I'm going to do the blue color on all 6 pieces. So the reason I traced the top corner of my sheet of paper is that lets me line up each piece of paper in the same spot. And I can just slide this forward. So I've just got my cup with the sponge and that paint. And I could leave sort of sponge strokes. So don't feel like you need to addition these, like they all need to be exactly the same. Play around with the materials. It's all an experiment. Oh, I got a little bit too much water, and that let the paint go underneath my stencil. I could even do something like this, where I let it drip. That might look kind of cool. Alright, so I'm back with dried blue on my paper, and I'm going to do a trick where I'm going to reuse this stencil. I'm just going to kind of line it up there, and then I'm going to use a second stencil on top of it to add some sort of texture. I'll use one of those stencils I showed you guys a little earlier that I bought at a hardware store or whatnot. And I just have that little magical spray bottle I showed you earlier from Target with some darker blue mixed in with some water. Just gonna lay my stencil on there. And you can see right away I kind of made a mistake there. Or maybe not a mistake, maybe I want that, but you can see the edge of my stencil. So I need to find something else to mask that with, mask that area with if I don't want that overspray on my next one. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera on high speed and do the other 5 pieces of paper. You guys can watch me do it. So my blue layers are dry. I'm going to go ahead and do some dry media through a stencil. So I cut a stencil to give me kind of some overlap with the sky, but also to block out me with the gas mask on and leave the kind of ground open. And I've just got some chalk pastels. I'm sure oil pastels would work, maybe Caran d'Ache. And what I found kind of works for me is I would just sort of hold down the stencil, and then I can kind of just blend that with my fingers or draw up against the stencil. It's kind of easier to come off the stencil onto the paper and then fill that gap by sort of smudging it. And voila! So I'm gonna go ahead and time lapse the others.